No Heroes Here, A Father's Journal. Written by Joseph Doty. Compiled and edited by Scott and Mary Ann Doty. Part 3.
Chapter 13. That night, our company was involved in an attack on a town vigorously defended by the enemy. I became so confused during this action that I did not know which end was up. I became embarrassingly lost and wandered for a while over a battlefield, asking soldiers if they knew where my platoon had gone. It was the most extensive and noisiest action I had been in. We had the support of several tanks from the 1st Armored Division, and a heavy concentration of artillery was waiting for the right moment to bang away. Our section was alongside the company commander as a scout returned to report. So close was I to the captain that I heard the scout tell him of numerous machine gun emplacements seen, as well as several anti-tank guns. We moved away then to the position assigned to us for the attack. At a signal from headquarters, the tanks began firing their cannon and machine guns at the enemy. In turn, the enemy let loose with an almost visible carpet of machine gun bullets from guns set to fire a stream of lead at the height of 18 to 24 inches above the ground. It was critically necessary to keep your head and butt down or literally lose one or the other. A German flare slowly drifting to the ground illuminated a scene of macabre dimensions. Illuminated also was one of our tanks that was immediately hit by an anti-tank shell and set afire. The smoke and fumes drifted across the field, enveloping us in our position, choking and coughing. We attempted to move away from it, but found ourselves pinned down by the heavy machine gun and now mortar fire. We managed to crawl forward a few yards until we were fortunate enough to come to a large depression on the edge of the field. The smoke was mostly behind us now, but as Buddy pointed out, so probably was the rest of our company. It was noticed an ammo box had been left behind on the field. It was suggested by the corporal that the one responsible for it go back and retrieve it. So there I was, crawling 10 or 15 feet across a field in Italy with German bullets zipping over my head. I was incredulous of it then, I am still. As I reached up to grasp the handle, a bullet grazed my left little finger. White-faced and shaken, I crawled back to the squad. A mortar round hit just above our little haven, and a burst from a machine gun, without a doubt fired at us, caused the corporal to prudently decide that we should get the heck out of there. I would just as well have stayed there squeezed against the ground until the rest of the company came to rescue us. But the decision had been made, and under trying circumstances, we began crawling one by one backward to what we hoped would be safe ground. This was when I became lost. Nothing I had learned as a kid in Yonkers, New York, or so far in the Army, had prepared me to crawl backward in a straight line in the dark, carrying 2 ammo boxes, carbine, and a ton of lead in my stomach. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. I was so scared I thought I heard someone whispering hoarsely in German. I had told myself as I started out to keep calm and everything would be all right, but God damn it, that did it. If someone around me was speaking German, sure as hell I was in the wrong place. To hell with crawling around. I spied some bushes nearby, rolled into them, and lay, except for my heart beating, real still, and let the war go on around me. I almost deluded myself into thinking this was just a game, and Mike or Bill would come up behind me and say, "Bang, bang, you're dead, Doty." While I was lying there, one of our tanks pulled up close by and let go with its cannon, nearly deafening me. The Germans quickly answered, and I had a ringside seat at a real heated battle. A burst of flame erupted in the German lines, outlining a group of houses and Germans running around. I was surprised to see how close we were to the outlying houses of this little town. The burst of flame immediately became the target of every American gun for miles around. A phosphorus shell exploded amongst the buildings, and everyone, just everyone, got the hell out of there. The tank, the Germans, and every GI able to move got out, because we all knew our artillery had the range and would work. I felt it was as good a time as ever to get up and run, which is what I did. In fact, I got right behind the tank. However, it was going too slow for me, so I cut and ran on my own. Dawn was on its way by then, and I could see many GIs sitting or kneeling, watching the Germans catch hell. I was well exhausted by this time. I did my best to locate the rest of the gun section or some part of the platoon. I began to wonder who was lost, them or me. One thing I did know for sure. I needed some sleep. Seeing an unoccupied slit trench, I fell into it face down, exhausted. The next thing I knew, someone was jabbing me in the shoulder. Forcing my eyes open, I saw it was now fully daylight. The someone jabbing me was a corporal I had never seen before. He looked very serious and yelled at me to get out of that hole, boy. Why? I asked innocently enough. Did you dig it? He asked. Well, no, I did not dig it, I replied. He said the man who did might need it if he returned, so get out. So I got out. Who could argue with such sound logic? He asked what company I was from. He was from the same one, so I was close to where I should be, although neither knew where my platoon was. He suggested I return to the company command post for instructions and get a new carbine immediately. Puzzled, I looked at the one I was carrying and discovered the stock had a big piece gouged out of it. Wow! He was kind enough to point me in the right direction, and I started. I was hoping that by accident I would come upon a familiar face, but no luck. On the way, I walked through what seemed a veritable army of GIs, jeeps, trucks, and so forth. There was no doubt in my mind that someone in headquarters wanted to take that town badly. I did not see such an accumulation of men and hardware before or after. I did locate the command post. Strangely, it was unoccupied. As any tired fool would do, I put my back against a shady tree and returned to my interrupted sleep. Awakened again by a boot jabbing my shoulder, I leaped to my feet. I saluted a man wearing the silver eagle of a lieutenant colonel. In response to his point-blank question, I informed him I sure as hell was not a deserter. If I were, would I be hanging around a command post with 2 boxes of .30 caliber ammunition? I told him the rest of my story about becoming lost and convinced him I was just what I appeared to be, a dumb and confused kid who did not know which end was up, and I needed a new carbine. He took me to his tent, gave me a drink of water and a bar of chocolate, and told me to hang around until he could find someone to direct me to where my platoon was, which was how this mess ended. Chapter 14. Strangely, after a fierce battle, the rest of the day was uneventful. We were set up along a footpath overlooking the main road, over which nothing moved all afternoon. A random artillery shell or two exploded some distance harmlessly away. If it were not for a prod or two from the corporal, I could have slept. Toward evening we were told to dig in for the night. No sooner had we finished when we were told we were to be relieved that night by a reserve company. The troops replacing us were coming to the battle line for the first time, and they were both nervous and tense. They also made a lot of noise, which made us nervous and jittery. If the Germans got wind of what was going on and shelled us or launched an attack, there would be hell to pay. Therefore, I was delighted when the time came for my squad to move out. The guy taking my place was so nervous he tried to get into my slit trench before I got out. It took a lot of pushing and shoving, as well as whispered curses, to get him to move enough for me to collect my meager belongings from under him. What a surprise after walking for an hour or two to find some jeeps and 3/4-ton trucks waiting at a rest area to take us the rest of the way. The drivers talked in normal voices to one another, but to me it seemed they were shouting. After not hearing a loud voice at night for a couple of weeks, when an accidental sound could mean a casualty, it was nerve-wracking to listen to them carry on so. The rest area was not more than a collection of 2- and 4-person tents pitched in an open field, but we saw a movie and a USO show while we were there. We could also take a 3-minute army shower, 1 minute to wet down, 1 minute to soap up, and 1 minute to rinse off. That was it. While there, some of the old-timers got passes to Rome. I hope they enjoyed it more than I did in Oran. I discovered how delicious a mixture of chocolate bars and cheese tasted. Brought to a slow boil in a tin can over a fire pit filled with sand and doused with gasoline, it was great. It's not entirely on par with Mother's Irish stew, but it's good. One day, there was a bit of excitement when a jeep pulled up, and 2 medics assigned to our company who had been thought lost in action tumbled out and were joyfully welcomed by their old comrades. A sudden attack by the Germans had trapped them. Taking cover in a ditch, they had been overlooked by the enemy until our guys counterattacked. One of the Germans, wounded, fell into the same ditch the medics were hiding in. Faithful to their calling, they patched him up, unfortunately calling attention to themselves. Surrounded by the Germans, thinking they were about to be taken prisoner, they pleaded that leaving the wounded man would surely cause his death. Unexpectedly, they were told to stay with the injured man. The Germans, shooting as they ran off, left them to be rescued by the Americans. I almost ended my military career twice during this rest period. The first time came about when I picked up a .45 automatic left lying in our tent. After hefting the unfamiliar weapon, I made sure the clip was out. I pointed it at an unsuspecting ant crawling just beyond the toe of my shoe. It was a hell of a surprise when it went off, only another half-inch and goodbye toe. Foolishly, the gun owner had failed to remove the bullet remaining in the chamber, and stupidly, I did not know any better. The second incident surpassed the first for the stupidest on my part. I had noticed a group of smashed German tanks left across the field as they were when their crews deserted them. Having time on my hands and being curious, I decided to examine them. I was always aware of mines, so I followed the white tape trail laid out by the engineers to show that the area had been cleared. I had 1 foot up on a tank when a voice bristling with authority called out to me, "Get your foot off that tank and get the hell over here." It suddenly occurred to me I had forgotten about booby traps. I followed my footsteps along the white tape trail until I was outside the danger area, and then, and only then, did I raise my head to see who had called out to me. It was Captain Black, our company commander. "Do you realize what might have happened if I didn't stop you just then?" Acknowledging my foolishness, I thanked him. "Don't thank me. Thank your friends back there. They saw you, but were afraid you would not pay attention if they called you, so they sent me." Saluting, I thanked him anyway, and then tried to say thank you to the guys. As expected, as a group, they were evasive about it, except for Buddy. We were in the rest area for 4 or 5 days. It was long enough to take a shower, have a lucky few visits to Rome, see a movie and a show, get a new carbine, and unwind a little, but not long enough to get that look out of the eyes of the tired soldiers. It all ended early in the morning of an unremembered day. Rousted out of the sack and bundled into jeeps, and once again we were going to fun and games. After being on the road for a while, we stopped for a chow break alongside a small river in a valley strewn with the wreckage of war. I had the distinct feeling that the fighting there had just ended, as trails of smoke were moving slowly away under a slight breeze. While eating, most of us admired the majesty of a castle-like structure high on a hill overlooking the valley. One of our guys suddenly grew tense. Pointing to the building, he exclaimed he had seen the sunlight reflecting from a binocular glass. Before we could react in any way to his alarm, several artillery rounds exploded nearby. One struck a jeep, and another landed in the nearby river. We jumped into our vehicles with minimal wasted effort and got out of there. Fortunately, I was in one of the first jeeps to clear the area. More rounds continued to fall around the rest of the convoy as they tore up the valley behind us. I had jumped into a jeep with a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on it. It was to this that I clung to dear life as we careened around trees and boulders, looking for the road. As I just said, we were on the way to fun and games. Chapter 15. There was a day of little activity, scattered outbreaks of shooting, with only a few artillery shells from each side. We were for a while hanging around. A sergeant from another platoon came walking down the hill toward our position. As quiet as the day was, it was a foolish lack of concern. Costly, too, as one of the stray bullets zipping around struck him in the abdomen. At once the call for a medic went out and was immediately answered. I could see the medic working on him and being assisted in putting the man on a stretcher. A request for volunteers to carry him back to an aid station was passed around, and to my surprise, my corporal volunteered me. In all, 6 volunteers were assigned to carry this man out of the mountains so as not to deplete any one section. We were from different squads. One was a company runner, as we needed someone to lead us back, and one was the medic. I will tell you that it was a tough duty, and I quickly found I did not have the strength to hold up my end for any length of time. Even if we had been walking on level ground, I don't think it would have been any easier. The dead weight of that man on the stretcher just about tore my arms from their sockets. We carried him down a mountainside, lifting him from rock to rock and sliding down as much as walking. The only break we got was when we crossed a small level area, and that was spoiled when a German gun battery tried for a lucky hit or two. At the sound of the incoming shells, we tried to run a little, with the poor guy moaning as he flopped around on the stretcher. Cattle were grazing on this small plateau, oblivious of our running between them and the German shells. After this break, it was downhill the rest of the way. I was not the only one feeling the strain. At one point, the company runner refused to take his turn. Instead, he volunteered to go ahead and find a better trail. We agreed rather than lose him altogether, and he took off, happily jumping from rock to rock. I did not think we would see him again, but I was wrong. He returned, but not before we slid and stumbled for another hour. Jesus! My arms and hands were killing me, but I would be damned if I would quit. I found myself mumbling, "Son of a bitch! Son of a bitch!" We were all beat, and our rest stops became more frequent. We would squat, glaring at each other as if to blame the other for the predicament we were in. It was becoming challenging to unclench my hands during our breaks, and I swear the only thing that kept me going was the humiliation of the memory of passing out during those first days. Thankfully, before that happened, the company runner returned with good news. We were only 100 yards away from a farmer's hut. The ground had leveled out again, and the excellent news renewed our vigor. We made it the rest of the way without trouble, and were warmly welcomed by an Italian family. No sooner had we gotten there than enemy shells began to fall all around us. The Italians had prepared for this by digging a cave in the side of a hill, and we all hid in there. 7 soldiers, 4 Italians, a couple of goats, and 1,000,000 flies. It was there I first tasted real Italian vino. It wasn't very good. I mixed some with the water from my canteen, significantly improving the flavor of both. The shelling came to a stop, and one of the Italian kids volunteered to go for help for the wounded sergeant. I had another helping of the vino and water. I was beginning to feel really comfy when the kid came back riding in a medical aid jeep. The medic driver already had a wounded man in the jeep. I was surprised to discover I knew the guy. His name was Jim Bangs, and I had gone through training with him. Both of us had been pressed into an infantry company due to the Anzio mess. I had last seen him one evening going past me on a trail. Thinking it was funny then, I asked him where he was going. "Boy, that is stupid," he said. "I'm going up to get shot in the head and killed just like you." Now, here he was, his right arm and leg bandaged, and though he looked groggy, I asked him how he was feeling. He said, "I'm hurtin', really hurtin', fella." I wished him good luck, but he seemed to think I needed it more than he did. It felt strange standing there talking to an acquaintance of mine lying on a stretcher with bullet holes in him. On our way back, we were again spotted by the German gun crew, and exploding shells punctuated our return. Not too many, of course, for the war in Italy. The Germans were out of many things. Although the number probably did not exceed 6 or 7, it was chilling to know they were aimed at us. We really hustled when we came to the small flat pasture, which afforded little or no protection. The cattle were still grazing as though nothing of any consequence was happening. A round was coming right at us. We hit the ground frantically as it exploded, showering the area with chunks of metal. Luckily, none of us was hurt, but 2 of the cattle were. One, mortally injured, was on its side, feebly kicking its last moments away. The other, struck in the forehead, was still on its feet, blood flowing from a split skull. Jumping to our feet, we headed quickly for the protection of a stone wall on the edge of the field. One of the guys was upset about leaving the poor animal to die in agony and wanted to go back and put it out of its misery. We tried to pull him along, but he was so insistent we let him go. He was slowing down our departure from the field anyway. Reaching the wall's safety, we turned to watch him hug the ground as another shell hit the edge of the field. He crawled up to within 4 or 5 feet of the animal and fired several shots into it, killing it. Taking one last look to be sure he had done a thorough job, he turned and started trotting back to us. Right then, we heard another shell coming our way, and he began to run in deadly earnest. I had not really noticed it before, but this fellow was a little overweight. How he managed to retain the extra poundage, I cannot imagine. Watching him run in fear for his life struck me as funny. Although red in the face from exertion, fat legs pumping to the extreme, he ran very slowly. Bareheaded now, his helmet had fallen off, and he revealed a balding scalp with tight, red, wavy hair. His foot caught the top, leaping over the wall, and he crashed to the ground in an explosive eruption of dust, gasping like a hooked fish. The shell had exploded harmlessly behind him, and thank goodness it was the last one. As he got to his feet and faced us, he looked startled and asked why we were smiling. Apparently, I was not the only one amused by his running technique. When I got back to my platoon, I discovered our hazardous trip across the pasture had been observed. I very humbly agreed it was stupid under any circumstances, especially while under the fire from a German cannon. That evening, we were treated to a hot meal. It was a beautiful time of day, but not to sit around watching an Italian town across the valley get demolished piece by piece by our artillery. It was easy to imagine with the bright red and yellow flashes of our artillery shells that we were observing a 4th of July fireworks display. Chapter 16. After watching the Italian town blown to pieces during our supper hour for dessert, we were told we were to advance to this pile of rubble to verify the Germans left there were no longer effective. We had been watching the artillery show from the offside of a valley, the town being perched on the rim of the other side. To get to the town, we had to hike quite a distance down our side and across a small river, proceed across the valley floor, and then work our way up the valley to the town. Before starting out, it was now dark, we had fresh ammo supplies handed out from the rear of a truck. Although the Germans could not see us, they had scouted out and knew we were up to something. An occasional mortar round exploded in and around the area. The older guys were getting quite a kick out of the nervous reactions of the fellows on the ammo truck. They would cringe and squeeze their lips tighter whenever they heard an exploding shell. I guess imagining what would happen if one of the mortar shells hit their truck was getting to them. I only needed a couple of clips for my carbine, but I also took a couple of hand grenades. I did not think I would need the grenades, but what the hell? Errol Flynn always had 2 or 3 hanging from his harness. Who could tell if a correspondent or a photographer might be around? I wanted to look like a seasoned fighter. We got to creeping and crawling around the valley soon afterward. Funny, but while we were in the comparative safety of the assembly area, the night seemed warm and comfortable. Now we were in what had been a no-man's land, and it was chilly, with a feeling of unfriendliness in the air. I wondered if some dumb German kid was feeling the same way. It was so dark you had to hold on to the guy in front of you or run the risk of losing your footing on the narrow trail. I had trouble keeping up with the 2 ammo boxes weighing me down. I took a few quick steps and, sure as hell, stepped off the trail and fell down the hill. I made a lot of noise and could sense everyone hitting the ground in anticipation of being fired upon. We were, but it was light and searching. Several mortar rounds came close. As I was lying there, trying not to breathe, a piece of rock or shrapnel struck me in the right ankle. It did not draw blood, but it hurt. To make matters a little bit worse, I had an asthmatic attack from the dust that had gotten into my face as I slid down the hill. Everyone was whispering to keep quiet. I heard our corporal telling someone to slide down to where I was and stop me from making that damn noise, just short of killing me. Luckily, no one wanted to fall the rest of the way down the hill, and I was left alone. As soon as I cleared my mouth and lungs of that dust, I managed to make my way up to the trail and get back in line. By this time, my group had gotten ahead of me, but I was double damned if I was going to rush and catch up. I did not get back to them until dawn broke, and the battle for what remained of the town started getting serious. There could not have been more than a platoon of Germans left behind to defend that town. Hell, they were not defending the town. They were left behind to slow us down, and that is all. but it seemed everyone had a machine gun and, as usual, a couple of mortars around to back them up. Someone up front got hit, and a German mortar burst started a call for the medics. Our mortars got going and really laid a metal carpet, taking the sting out of the German fire. I was startled to discover I had dozed off, not out of boredom, I assure you. I was plain tuckered out. Dawn was almost complete, and I began to think of eating something. We were in an orchard with trees, heavy with delicious yellow plums I had grown fond of while in Italy. It was only natural that I would reach up and pick one for breakfast. The guy behind me asked me to get one for him also. As I took hold of it, the plum exploded in my hand. A German sniper had seen me take the first one. Knowing how good they were, he figured I would go back for a second one. How right he was and how lucky I was. If the other guy wanted a plum, he could damn well pick it himself. Of all things, I had the runs that morning, not from fear, I hoped. More likely it was from those delicious plums I had been eating. The government had issued brown underwear and even brown toilet paper for camouflage reasons. But neither they nor I had figured out a way to make a white butt brown. I was undoubtedly conspicuous that morning of July 16th, 1944. Thank goodness I wasn't alone in my problem. Scattered here and there were the white behinds of equally embarrassed soldiers. Very soon, I would not have to worry about that kind of problem for a long time. Enemy artillery began to drop a few rounds remarkably very close to us. Rather than take the time to dig in, most of us looked for a place affording some protection. Buddy and I were close to a road culvert, thinking it was an excellent hiding place, so we went for it. I was first and wasted little time, or thought, as I popped into and came face to face with a young German soldier. Wounded, the soldier had crawled into the culvert also. The German soldier was young and scared, younger than I, and he had a pistol. In such tight quarters, I could only defend myself with a knife. I thought I was done for. I was not. He was. The soldier managed to crawl out of the culvert pipe and died. Buddy got a boot in the face as I backed out of there. We spent the rest of the morning setting up and taking down our guns. We moved here and there in case covering fire was needed by our riflemen as they mopped up what remained of the Germans in the town. If it were not for 6 or 7 strategically placed snipers, we could have continued our chase of the leading German group we had been fighting the last several days. Just as the last one was flushed out, we came under the fire of a German 88 cannon, effectively stopping us for a while. The German 88 was a good weapon, if a weapon can be considered good. The shell is fired and travels almost flat like a baseball pitcher's fastball, giving you about as much time to duck. The one firing at us was mounted on a tank, and unless something was done to disable it, we could be stuck there all day. Surprising as it may seem, although an anti-tank weapon called a bazooka was available, none of the regular members of the company knew how to handle or fire it. I hesitantly mentioned I had some experience with this weapon while in training. Another replacement from our platoon, having the same training, also spoke up. A group of 2 volunteers with wavering courage, a sergeant with no enthusiasm for the task, and a corporal carrying a handbook for the weapon, assembled to discuss the attack on the tank. Our plans and courage were for naught, as the German tank lurched out of its place of concealment with a sudden roaring of its engine and clashing of gears. With an oath of relieved disappointment, we all foolishly jumped up and stared at the blue haze of smoke left by the tank as it sped up the road to safety. For whatever reason, we were rid of the tank. Rejoining my squad, my reputation somewhat embellished, I had time to consider my feelings about what almost happened. I didn't think I would ever volunteer for anything again, especially to go up against a giant German tank. Thank you, but no thanks. We were given some time to rest, have some breaded veal cutlets, disguised as sea rations, and taking over a couple of German-dug slit trenches, a quick nap. Another night of creeping and crawling around brought us to the outskirts of a little town just before daylight, waiting breathlessly for liberation. I hoped to hell that the German tank wasn't there. But this time it seemed the town had been left to us without a fight. Our scouts had been up to the outskirts of it and reported they could find no sign of defenders. Because of this erroneous report, we were a little careless and walked into a trap the Germans had prepared for us. Nothing big or elaborate, but instead of shooting at us to keep us out, they waited until we had committed ourselves to it, then started banging away at us. As my section entered the scene, we were told to join a squad of riflemen checking out the houses lining one side of the town's only street. 10 or 12 of us assembled in a small garage attached to the first house on our list. We were pretty sure we were the first GIs to be in this place since the Germans left, and I, for one, had booby traps on my mind. I remembered very well the training films we had been shown about them, warning us not to lay on a bed, flush a toilet, not open closet doors, and check everything before moving it. While still in the garage, I noticed a canteen leaning against the wall on a shelf about head high. I called the corporal's attention to it. Before he had a chance to move, one of the riflemen picked up the canteen, revealing a hand grenade set to go off. It didn't. Thank God. We stood for a moment staring at the lethal thing, expecting it to go off in our faces. We ran like hell out of there. We all expressed our opinions as to the ancestry of the stupid guy who was so unthinking to put our lives up for grabs for want of a foolish souvenir. Even Buddy wouldn't pull a trick like that. Oh, yeah? It was decided we would search the houses in teams of 2. Buddy and I were to take the house next door, leaving at once. The others were getting into a heated discussion about who was going with whom to what house. Walking into a house that had been occupied by Germans or fascists up until 30 minutes ago made me very nervous. I was reasonably sure we wouldn't find any Germans there, but they could have booby-trapped the place to hell and beyond. My being nervous didn't bother Buddy a bit. He seemed to feel this house was left to him by a rich uncle, and if he looked hard enough, he would find a hidden hoard of gold. He did everything wrong. Never once looking for tripwires, he pulled open closet doors and, in general, behaved like the boob in the training films. He went clamping downstairs to check out that part of the house while I stayed upstairs. Usually, I would not want to be alone, but I had to be safer being anywhere else than with Buddy. I had worked my way into a bedroom. I was standing in front of a closet door, wondering whether or not I should open it, when Buddy came crashing in, kicking open the door, which had closed behind me. Involuntarily, I swung around and fired in the direction of the noise he made. Luckily, the bullet went over his head and smacked into the door frame. Hey, you think I'm a Nazi? Heil Hitler. Mother Mary and Joseph, I almost shot him, and he clowns around. Buddy had come to get me, as he had found something interesting in the cellar. On the way down, he pulled open a door and showed me a toilet. Damn thing doesn't have any water in it, he complained as he pulled the chain, and that stone seat is colder than you know what. This boy was a real menace. I was getting lightheaded just being so close to him. His discovery in the cellar was an empty wine rack. I had hoped for a secret radio transmitter or a German arsenal of some degree, but no luck. What say we break this damn thing up, said Buddy. That sounded like a good idea, and I enthusiastically joined him. Having vented our frustration out on the wine racks, we returned to the bedroom I'd been checking out before he had interrupted me. It contained a chest of drawers, and, of course, Buddy had to pull each one out and scatter the contents all over the floor. One of the drawers had some family pictures in it, the sight of which upset Buddy. He smashed the frames and cut up the photographs with a pocket knife. Each act was accompanied by a swear word. I said, "Come on, let's get out of here. There's nothing to worry about in this place." Buddy stopped in the doorway and took a grenade from his pocket on the way out. He pulled the pin and turned to throw it into the room to complete our destruction of it. Then, unaccountably, he seemed to think better of it and tried to stick the pin back into the grenade's handle. Failing in this, he turned to me with an oath and handed me the now armed grenade, saying, "Do something with this thing, will you?" The only thing I could think to do was what he had started to do, throw it into the room. Somehow, the bang it made as it tore holes in the walls and scattered mortar dust over us gave me a feeling of wreaking some small vengeance on the family of strangers who had, in my mind, cooperated with the Germans. Suddenly an artillery barrage was laid upon the town. More surprisingly, a large contingent of German infantry had lain hidden in the street ahead, and a hefty concentration of small arms fire was directed at our troops. The unexpected attack by the enemy sent soldiers lunging into doorways and behind walls for protection. Having drawn us into the trap, the Germans now snapped it shut. Hearing the sudden increase in firing, Buddy and I ran out to see what was going on and stumbled into this first-class shooting match. We took 2 or 3 steps into the melee before checking our momentum and throwing ourselves back into the house's doorway. How we escaped getting shot, I will never know. Even Buddy was a mite shaken up. Foolish as he was at times, Buddy was a real gutsy guy when the going got tough. Eyes opened wide with fright and excitement, I looked across the street. I saw Captain Black, the usual cigar in his mouth, looking at Buddy and me, shaking his head at our narrow escape, or was it in wonder at our stupidity? We decided to go back to the garage to get our ammo boxes. It was a good thing we did, as the combined group had already gotten back from the houses they were checking out. I am happy I did not have to do that every day. I do not remember ever having been quite as nervous as I was while in a stranger's house looking for Germans or booby traps. Word was passed to us to gather our ammo and equipment and report to our platoon leader. As luck would have it, he was on the other side of the street and wanted us over there. We would have to cross while the remaining Germans took pot shots at us. However, we had plenty of covering fire and made it all right. I leaped into a doorway to catch my breath and get my nerves in order. Suddenly, 2 artillery rounds smashed into the front of the house across the street, making a hell of a hole, most of which fell into the street, covering all of us with dust and debris. More rounds went sailing over our heads to fall behind us as we started to move up the street. Heavy rifle fire sent us sprawling onto the dirty street surface. I found myself in front of a little store that had its front protected by a rolled-down corrugated steel door. A sniper left behind to cover the retreat of his comrades fired from a window right in front of us. He was not aiming at anyone in particular, but we all reacted as if we were the intended target. He was not a good shot, but we did not stop to consider this as we all scattered to get out of his sight. I jumped back, stumbled over my ammo boxes, and tried to break through the corrugated steel door. I gave up on that and went down the street to a doorway crowded by quicker-witted guys. One of them was the platoon leader. "Turn around and look up the street," he said. Guess what? There they are, right where I stumbled over them, my ammo boxes. "I will give you 1 minute to get them back." Right then I could have done several things. 2 of them would have gotten me court-martialed, and the other was too foolish to even be remembered. I took a long, shaky breath, sprinted up the street, grabbed the boxes, and beat it back to the doorway's shelter with bullets gouging out chunks of granite around my feet. There was no need for our machine gun. Leaving it with Tex, the rest of the squad unslung our carbines to help the riflemen try to dislodge the one sniper who still had us tied down. Looking across the street, I noticed that corrugated iron door again. Were those my fingernail scratches on it? I got so mad looking at it that I forgot the danger. I stepped out of the protection of the doorway and fired a full clip into that window opening. Well, that got rid of the sniper. We cleared out the rest of the town soon after. Then, grabbing a bite or 2 of roast turkey, disguised again as sea rations, the platoon assembled for a head count and we went back to chasing Germans. It was a beautiful morning, not a cloud in the sky. I would have liked to flop down and watch the endless blue sky until I fell asleep, but we all had to earn our pay one way or another, and shooting at and being shot back at by others was the current thing to do. We started moving steadily up the street and cleared out the rest of the Germans soon after. That poor town took a pasting. In just 1 day of the war, it had been transformed from a butterfly to an earthworm. We were attacked again just as we got beyond the outskirts of the town. I remember hearing a hell of a fight going on to the left of us. I lay there, my belly close to the ground, when word came to advance no matter what. We jumped up, the riflemen in front of us shooting as fast as possible, forcing the Germans to give ground. Return fire was heavy, and the call for the medics seemed to be continual. Our squad sought protection behind an embankment. Before ducking down behind it, I caught sight of a German firing a burp gun at us. Everyone was hollering to one another to shoot the son of a bitch. Somebody finally did. But for a while, that guy had a lot of GIs eating dirt. With so many orders being shouted, nobody found time to do it, and that German had an exciting time for a while. The troops to the left were hidden from our view by a slight rise of ground. We could all hear a lot of shooting going on over there. A head suddenly popped up over the rise, and a tense voice ordered us to bring the machine gun over in a hurry. We started over, and were just crawling over this slight rise when a mortar barrage started falling right on us. Hit the ground. I was already there. Dig in! Dig in! Christ, it was too late for that. I felt terrified. My breath seemed to catch in my throat, and my face and neck felt as if they were swollen. I had never had that feeling before. At 10:30 in the morning on a beautiful Italian day, a mortar fell in our midst. I was wounded.